what we're going to have a look at today. Here's our agenda. We're going to, or Sam is going to talk a little bit about McKinsey's archetypes for AI strategy, which I'm not going to cover. I'm going to leave that entirely for him to explain what that means. And then we're going to have a look at what features are out there now, or at least some of the ones that we're aware of. And we'll have a little bit of audience participation at that point as well. So I'm intrigued to see what comes back out of those polls. And I'd like you to think about how ready you and your organisation, or maybe the organisations you work with if you're a consultant or an advisor in some other capacity, how do you feel that the organisations you're working with feel about AI? How prepared do they feel? So think about that in the back of your mind as we look at the different features that are available today. And we'll round off with a discussion between Sam and I about that. So as I say, please do pop your questions in the Q&A panel. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Sam to talk about the archetypes of AI strategy. What does it mean, Sam? So AI and digital workplace, off you go.
Thank you. Yeah, so McKinsey put out a paper in May this year that I found quite helpful as a way to get your head around what's going on. And they basically said there were 3 archetypes for how companies are approaching applying AI to their businesses. So first of all, they talked about takers. So this is people who are using off-the-shelf public models, you know, ChatGPT most famously, but also things like Claude or Midjourney for image generation. And I would say this is what we all need to be doing just to be not left behind. But as you probably know, using public models, there is a risk about confidentiality because, you know, if you gave it even like a few paragraphs about a client and pasted it in there saying, can you summarize this? You're basically giving proprietary data over to a public model. Perhaps more relevant then are what McKinsey call shapers. So shapers are organizations that are integrating a public model with internal data and doing it in a secure way. So it might be, for example, that you take a public model and feed it with your own CRM data, and that would allow you to, for example, generate profiles of customers. Or you might create an assistant for your customer support, or the help files that you would normally give for the employees on a help desk that put into the model, and the model then generates responses or prompts for helping customers, or maybe for the people on the IT help desk. Most sophisticated are the makers, and makers are organizations that are building their own foundation model. So that term foundation model, it would be things like GPT-4, and then the interface on top is ChatGPT, but also GPT-4 as a foundation model is what Copilot uses. So it's the distinction between what's the large language model that's doing the generative AI behind the scenes and the interface or the way in which it's applied. Claude by Anthropic, Gemini by Google, they're all foundation models. So why would you do that? If you had a scenario where it would give you a real competitive edge to train your own large language model on a particular data set or optimize it for a particular application, then yes, it might be worth the investment. McKinsey say you're looking at between $10 million to $100 million. Oh,
that's not
so probably worth pointing out that Clearbox doesn't have its own foundation model at this point, Susie, but you know, sell a few more reports and we might be in the running.
And I think it's fair to say as well that most of the vendors that we're looking at, they may claim to be makers in some form, but the vast majority of them are shapers that we're seeing at the moment.
Indeed, and I think that's quite legitimate because most of the applications are using the versatility of these large language models. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, isn't it, that the range of problems that something like ChatGPT can handle anyway, and making them easier to use or making them more specific to a particular scenario. The thing about building your own foundation model as a vendor is I'm not sure it makes sense. If you are like a vendor into a vertical like pharmaceuticals, then yes, you might train it a lot on research into drug interactions and have a model that could then be applied to advisory scenarios with the right interface. But most of our vendors are not industry specific, so what are you going to train it on? and certainly where you're going to get the money from are two fundamental questions.
And there are still questions around the Shapers model, though, aren't there, around security? It's certainly something that we hear people mentioning and are quite worried about, that Shaper approach really does ring fence that data. Do you think that it does, or are there still risks around that ring fencing?
Well, I think this is where companies that have an AI strategy recognize that risk, and they're saying, yeah, we need to make sure that any training that goes on or any data that's fed into a model is done in our own instance of the model. So it might be hosted on Azure and so on, but it's a private model. You're not putting that data externally. Copilot's an interesting one because it's not actually trained on your data. What it's taking is a generic, the GPT-4 model, and it will send your query off to the GPT-4 model, and then it will combine it with what you have on, say, the Microsoft 365 in your private cloud. So it respects all the security and so on, and it gives you something which is tailored to your organization because it's using your data set, but it's not actually learning on your data set. So it's never going to get any better compared to what you might do at the maker level of saying, yes, we're also going to teach the model about our specific industry, our specific customers, and over time improve what's going on.
Okay.
There's a technique which is human reinforcement learning, where it's not talked about much because it's not the sexy bit of AI, but basically GPT-4 has thousands of people which are looking at what answers it spits out, and either they call it punishing the model, which sounds quite harsh, or rewarding the model, but actually saying, yes, this is great, do more of it, or no, that was wrong, don't do it again. So it still actually requires an awful lot of human effort to refine the model. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time, Susie. Of course, then you've got a whole area of concern about the model being truthful to the data, but say things that you don't really want it to say. Particularly, for example, if it's been trained on data sets that might have racist material in there, or even expressing political views when you want the model to be politically neutral. That's where you need to do the intervention and the reinforcement learning to either reinforce the right kind of output, or sometimes just to say, yeah, you've got to filter that kind of output out. So GPT-3 and 3.5 did produce some quite worrying results. I don't know that OpenAI put a lot of effort into now intercepting those. So, for example, it might give a politically neutral answer to something in the past where you could have almost like tricked it to write a poem about why Donald Trump is so marvelous, that kind of thing.
Okay, so I wonder then, we hear a lot now when we work with our clients that a very common cry is, why doesn't the search work like Google? So seeing as there isn't this kind of training aspect of the AI tools that are available now, maybe we'll start to hear, why doesn't this AI work like ChatGPT or something similar? Because the training aspect is certainly not something that we've seen much of the vendors doing just yet.
I'm sure it's already happening, Susie. Yeah, because when we use, for example, ChatGPT in our private lives, we're probably asking it for things like recipes, things where there's a large corpus of information in the public domain that can be trained on. When we ask it for what are the key selling points of this particular client that we have internally, it's got relatively little data to work with, and there hasn't been any training. So relatively speaking, the results are going to fall much shorter from expectation. But let me move on a little bit and talk about some of the actual use cases that McKinsey found in their study. There we go. Yes, if you Google McKinsey survey May 2024, you'll find this chart and other good results. So they did a reasonably large survey of several thousand organizations, saying what problems you're actually trying to solve with AI at the moment. And marketing and sales, products or service development and IT came out quite heavily. It's pretty interesting when you look at those numbers that the biggest users of it is still only 34% of respondents said they're actually applying AI to a business problem. And there was a reworked State of the Digital Workplace survey results, which came out, I think, last week or the week before. And they said very similar things. Susie, I think you on LinkedIn had talked about a similar survey with internal comms, where the mood is definitely quite conservative. It's, it's a cliche like teenage sex, everybody's talking about it and not many people are doing it. And that's, I think that's probably quite reasonable when it feels like such a fast moving area to get to grips with. So within this, like marketing and sales side, I think it's quite interesting that content support for marketing strategy it's a fairly obvious use of generative AI, I think, to say, can you write us some copy and then we'll fine tune it. Personalized marketing, though, for us in the digital workplace arena is probably more interesting because there's a lot of talk about using generative AI to produce hyper-personalized content. So that might be the employee handbook, which is not just sending you to the right sections of the handbook because it knows about your profile, but actually producing a uniquely tailored version of the handbook for you based on the core material. Not without its risks, as I'm sure we could go on to discuss. Products and service development, so things like scientific literature research review. Generative AI is just brilliant at taking masses and masses of data and being able to distill it down. Law firms doing a similar thing in terms of searching for precedents and trying to find doing more kind of comprehensive analyses. But you might also have heard there was a US lawyer where GPT completely dreamed up, hallucinated some case law, and the lawyer was fined by the judge for actually presenting it in court without checking for it. And then on the IT side, help desk chatbots. So it's a little bit confusing in that right-hand column, but the IT help desk chatbot is aimed at the end user, whereas the bottom of the IT help desk AI assistant is when you phone up the help desk. They in turn have their own behind-the-scenes products which are giving them prompts for things. So early days, but I think it's always worth looking at surveys like this just to get a sense of where people are really kind of investing out and trying to find out more. If we move on a little bit to think about knowledge workers and more towards our sphere of the digital workplace, probably the thing that we should be thinking about most in terms of employees is using GPT, for example, is it's like a democratization of AI. So we've had AI in the workplace for decades. I used to work on AI for insurance underwriting systems that would take applications and assess it. And all the call centers and help desks have used AI to manage those scripts or to help the expert taking the call to step through the solution finding process. But those AI instances were heavily curated and quite heavily controlled. What we're faced with now are the Pandora's box being opened up where any employee can go to a public model and start using it and saying, this is great, I need to do a presentation and it's done 60% of the work for me. And that's why it's important that organizations are getting on top of this in the same way that we saw, for example, WhatsApp just explode as a shadow IT tool that employees were using because it fulfilled a problem for them that often the corporate solution wasn't doing very well. In effect, we got shadow AI going on at the moment. And until an organization can say, well, here's a more secure corporate approved equivalent, it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle and say to people, you can't use generative AI because the people have been experimenting with it in their private lives. Say, but this is great, it saved me a ton of time. You're telling me you don't want to be efficient? That doesn't make sense. I think that's quite reasonable. So what are we seeing? Things like transcripts of videos and automatic translations. GPT-4 is really, really good at doing translations as certainly as a working draft. And drafting content and summarizing text. I'm going to talk about some examples of what we've seen in the vendors with that, aren't we, Susie? Checking validation. So in effect, proofreading, which is where the accuracy of some of these models and its relentless patience in doing it is really handy. Generating code, of course, because a lot of the large language models have been trained on code libraries, so they're very good at generating new code. So I did hear that like Substack had actually banned automatically generated code now because it looks good, but actually it doesn't perform as well as you might hope. And brainstorm, I think, is a really interesting one. So if you've got Microsoft 365 and you use the whiteboard tool, you can actually now say to Copilot, stick some post-it notes on there. You be one of the brainstormers and everyone else will join in. And there was a recent study on Nielsen Norman Group, nng.com, where they looked at the quality of the brainstorming, and it was surprisingly good. You know, because a lot of people say, well, generative AI, it's not creative, it's just synthesizing from what's gone on before. But if you've ever worked with humans in your average corporate brainstorming session, they're not that creative either. And it takes a while to move beyond the obvious. Having Copilot in there, I think at least helps you to move beyond the obvious. And then the last one, learning and development. So again, that's that hyper-personalization, the ability to create highly tailored course material, I think is quite an appealing use case.
And just before we move on to the next session, we've actually got a question that's come through that's probably quite a good timing for now. Someone has said that they're using ChatGPT-4, which says that it keeps their data private and doesn't train on our information. So we're allowing staff to upload internal data / information to the tool for data analysis, editing, etc. Are others doing the same? Is there still hesitation to enter internal information and data despite the privacy gained through paid tools?
So my impression is that yes, IT departments are now taking the models that people know and doing this through secure private instances of it. It's the hesitancy probably comes from the education required for employees to understand the difference, because it is quite a nuanced thing saying, yes, it's exactly like the consumer version, you just can't use it, you've got to use this one. But you know, we've been there before. It's like email in outlook.com versus Microsoft Outlook, because Microsoft have loved giving two different things the same name. And I don't think people at the moment necessarily fully appreciate the risks, and that's normal, isn't it? You know, most employees, they just want to get the job done, and it's really down to like corporate security to just remind people of what's safe and what isn't.
I think there's also a degree of the education around the IT colleagues as well. I know I spoke to a client recently and they were still concerned about how far reaching something like ChatGPT or similar tools would be, Copilot, for example, and how far it would reach into something that's supposed to be for the eyes of the C-suite only, and whether it would draw on that information just because it's part of the company's ecosystem. So I think there's due diligence that's probably needed so that people can reassure themselves that things are set up correctly, or to discover that maybe something would be risky if they allowed it in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. With any technology change like this, I think the ones doing all the talking about it are the innovators, the early adopters, who are quite comfortable with educating themselves about what pros and cons and risks are. But if we introduce this into a corporate environment, we've got to think about the late majority, who are much more conservative. And you might remember when Microsoft released Delve into Microsoft 365, and Delve would say, oh, these are all Susie's documents. And the Susie's, not you, sorry, that was a bad example, these are all Sarah's documents. And Sarah would go, oh gosh, I didn't realize everybody could see my documents. And that isn't what was happening. You know, it was because Sarah had shared that document with her colleague, but people didn't have that mental model of how access control worked. And they thought that, well, if it's visible within Microsoft 365 to Jeremy, then it must be visible to everybody. And we're going to have the same again when internal models like this are surfacing results where people didn't maybe realize that it was actually internally available to everybody.
So let's move on with that in mind. I think the kind of layperson's perspective, I suppose, of some of these features that are actually available on the market now. So we're going to have a look at some of those features that are out there that are within the employee experience platform market. So that's kind of a mixture of traditional intranets and also internal comms tools and a variety of other things as well. But we do have some audience participation for you. So while we talk through the examples, I want you to vote on the poll that hopefully is going to ping up in the background as I talk. So the first one, we're going to have a look at the auto translation of videos. So this isn't just captions, this is also the audio side of things as well. And I'd like you to vote on the poll and say what your reaction to it. Is it something that you'd like to use? Can you see how it would be helpful, but it's not necessarily for you or for your organisation? Do you wish that you'd had this years ago for whatever reason that might be? Does it make you nervous? Or do you have questions? And if you have questions, then please do put them in the chat or into the Q&A panel. And let's have a look. So I'm going to see, hopefully, this little video is going to work. This is showing auto translation. So I'm just going to...
La première raison, c'est que le contenu est au cœur de la communication.
That is in French at the moment. And you can see that there is the automatic generation of captions as a starting point. So this is a product called Sociable. And they are very big on kind of comms side of things. And they're one of the first that we've seen to do this automatic translation. And what you can see is happening here is the employee is changing the languages that they know, so removing French and changing it to English and saving settings. And I'm just going to turn the audio back on. And that video that was in French, uploaded in French with a French speaker, should now...
Naturally. Artificial intelligence is transforming all professions, but more particularly that of internal communication. There are two reasons for this.
And that is automatic generated, and you'll see the lips slightly uncanny valley in places. The lips don't quite line up with the words that are kind of going on screen. And then it's just showing how easy it is to actually generate that alternative language. You can see the little flags along the top there. And essentially just add in another language, and within a few seconds, it will generate that additional language. It's not something that's available on the fly yet because of the amount of data essentially that it takes to work that up. Yes, so Sam, what do you think of that one first of all, before we start seeing what other people think of it?
The bit that I loved is when it switched to English, he was still doing English with a French accent. That was very charming.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. I mean, what I think is great is that normally when you dub something, you're very much aware, well, I am, that the lips are not in sync, and it's a little bit distracting. So what they're doing here is they're actually manipulating the video a bit, aren't they? And they're making the lip sync work as well. But we work with a lot of organizations that traditionally say our working language is English, you know, almost to reduce cost. And yet when you talk to workers in other countries, particularly maybe the frontline workers, they're not confident working in English or whatever the corporate language is. But it's so expensive to translate into Turkish and Spanish and so on as well. So up to now, organizations haven't bothered. This, I think, crucially brings the cost down to a point where it is viable, and hopefully will make things like presentations on the intranet more appealing to a wider audience.
I agree with you, and I think what's really helpful is the fact that the captions are auto-generated as well, or that they are auto-generated alongside the translated video. So again, if you're in a situation where you can't watch a video with audio, or maybe where you prefer reading rather than watching a video for your own kind of learning approaches, I think it's really nice that they've kind of done the whole package in this one example. But I think it's also quite remarkable how simple it is. So from an admin or publisher perspective, the fact that it is just a matter of just choosing. I mean, this whole video itself is about 2 minutes long, and I've shown you about a minute of it. So it doesn't take long at all to do that kind of translation of a video, which is really, really interesting, I think.
So we got the poll results up. And I'm intrigued by the second one, helpful but not for us. Why do you think we might have got that response, Susie?
Potentially because we've got a few consultants, small teams possibly. So I don't think so. For example, us at Clearbox, we're such a small team. I don't think it would be something that we would want, but I could definitely
That's true.
be useful in other places. But if there's anybody else who's answered that who isn't in a small team, then please do pop something in the chat so that we can talk about it. And I'm also intrigued by the person who's a little bit nervous.
I can see that, because there's a whole question about authenticity now, isn't there?
Yes, definitely.
So if you can do this, why can't you make your CEO say, and we're now announcing that everybody gets 79 days holiday per year fully paid?
Yes.
And how do you know if that's what they really said or not?
Absolutely. And I think there's that ethical nature of AI generally, particularly around generative AI, which is that transparency about whether something's been generated or not, but then what the impact of that actually is. And quite a lot of the features that we've seen that are using generative AI don't have any sort of flag or anything that's ironically automatically generated to show it's using AI. And I kind of think if for something like this, where it's like, well, our CEO speaks French, so it's fair enough they're using this to allow them to speak in our, like, my preferred language. Hopefully employees could understand, rather than spending money on translating it, actually this is a quicker and cheaper approach. But definitely for the initial generation of things, I think some sort of flag would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's just good practice for any automated translation, isn't it? Even when companies have been putting it into Google Translate over the last 7 or 8 years, you always should flag if it's machine generated, because anything has legal ramifications. If you translate a policy automatically, and there was some kind of industrial tribunal, then that would be a factor in terms of, was this a legitimate translation or not?
And I thought the chat was quiet. I think it was disabled. It should now be enabled, everybody. So if you do want to chat, pop anything in there, it should now be working for everybody. But do let us know if not. There we go. Thank you.
Whoever let us know, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Apologies. The joy of technology, eh? If only
That's right.
had
Angela, the legal eye straight in there. Thank you, Angela.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to share the results for everybody, just so that then you can see those results for that very first question. But I think that's quite a really nice example. As I say, I'm quite impressed with Sociable's usage of AI here, and I suspect this will be one that we start to see appear in other tools as well.
So it's the only product we know of that does it at the moment, Susie, is that right?
Yes, the only one that I've seen so far with this particular generative AI usage, but Sociable aren't unusual because they are the only ones that have done other things. So they also have a filter that's applied to their AI tools behind the scenes, so that you can say things like what the tone of your organization is, and Sociable allows you to share into social media tools, so employee advocacy, and it says when somebody, it allows you to set things like, when somebody shares into LinkedIn, only include 2 emojis, and this is the tone, and this is our kind of ethos. So Sociable are doing some quite interesting things with AI, I think. It's worthwhile keeping an eye on what they're up to. And we've got an example. So Vincent Bollore, apologies for the pronunciation of that, used this feature at the beginning of the year to wish everyone a happy new year to employees around the world in more than 50 languages. So yeah, I think if I was an employee, hopefully just having a happy new year message and knowing it was AI generated, hopefully people will be accepting of that. It's, as you say, if there's bigger messages that implies that maybe AI is being used for other things, that there might be some problems. Okay, right, that's our second poll time. So we are going to talk a little bit about a co-pilot feature. So this is about anticipating replies. We're going to open up the poll again, exactly the same responses. So whether it's something you'd like to use, if you'd like to see how it might be helpful, but it's not for you, wish you had it years ago, etc., etc. So I'm going to hand over to Sam. I can get it to move on. There we go, to talk through this one.
Yeah, so Copilot is all over Microsoft 365. So there's loads of different examples we could talk about. But I kind of like this one because I haven't seen it done elsewhere. And this is applying Copilot to Viva Engage, Yammer, for those of us who have been around for a long time. And what it's doing is that it's prompting, coaching someone who's about to make a post. Particularly, I think this one actually comes from the leadership wall aspect. So it's in this example, it's not for anyone, but it would be, for example, a CEO or someone from the executive suite who's about to make something which is quite an announcement-like. And they've typed the text on the left. On the right-hand side, Copilot is suggesting what the readers might ask. So it's analysing the text and it's preempting things that maybe need spelling out. I kind of like this, I think. The reservations I've heard expressed is that if you try and preempt every question and answer them all within the text, it probably gets very long. And then if you say, so anybody got any questions, the answer should be no if Copilot's done a good job because you've answered them all. But I think it does at least give you that coaching prompt to say, do I need to address this? And it's a bit like any other writing you do in business. If you have the luxury of saying to someone else, could you just cast your eye over this and tell me what you think from another perspective, that's really handy. But that's a big ask. And if you're doing this at 9 o'clock at night, you probably don't want to disturb a colleague and ask them to do that. We can disturb Copilot whenever we want. So there you go. The tireless assistant, our faithful robot slave is coming to reality.
I think
the other thing it's worth to mention, sorry, Susie, the other thing that's worth mentioning in Viva Engage is that Copilot will also then help analyze the sentiment of the responses that you get. And again, it will be for the individual who made the post. So I like that democratization, to use that word again, the democratization of analytics that's coming through rather than it being just the analytics dashboard that only the admins could see. Susie.
I think that just touching on that point, actually, the sentiment analysis is always something that I think is valuable and doesn't appear enough. I think in analytics, it's usually hard to kind of generate that sort of data, but actually baking it into this sort of approach, I think is really helpful.
Yeah.
But my concern is around that prompting all of the questions that people may ask. If you are very diligent and do then apply, as you say, not only could it be particularly long, the posts that you then end up with, but when you're thinking about something like Viva Engage, it is a social tool, it is a community tool. And so sometimes you do want to leave the odd thing a little bit open to encourage people to ask questions, particularly I think if you're an organisation that's trying to start people off with using community features and show that yes, it's a safe space, you can ask questions. I think sometimes just leaving some of those little gaps in can be useful.
Yeah, I don't think it exists, but what I'd love Copilot to do when I'm writing an email that says please see the attached file and I forget to attach it, it says, Sam, you idiot, you haven't attached the file. If you could do that,
yeah,
it'd save me an awful lot of grief.
That would be helpful. And actually someone, Lawrence just said in the chat that anticipating replies would be useful. It also recommended resource documents that contain additional details as well. Yes, I agree. I think having that added in so you don't have to go and find a link, that it's kind of like, oh, you seem to be talking about this. And then giving you as a little picker would be quite a nice thing.
You sounded dangerously like Clippy then, Susie, but I'm like you are.
That's kind of what AI is, isn't it? It's just Clippy, but modern.
Ellen's just said this looked a bit like FAQs, which are seldom F frequently, yeah. I'm sure she means, but it could help make your message more clear. Yeah, I was thinking about FAQs, Ellen, as well, as I was talking about it. All good ways to get the author to reflect before they publish. So we've got the poll results, Susie.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, just while we're talking about FAQs, there are, of course, tools that do generate those as well. So summarize a piece and turn them into, as you say, not frequently, but asked questions or in a question and answer format. Yeah, sometimes those can be verbose, but they, again, can be a helpful kind of summary. But yes, the responses so far. So coming out top is it's something that people would like to use. So over half of the people who've filled in the poll have said that it's something they want to do. We've got the odd person who's saying they have questions, and someone saying that they wish they'd had it years ago. I think particularly to help prompt some of those busy leaders and help them write more engaging posts, I think would be helpful. Angela, you've made a good point saying that for me it's what, when, how and why you might use this, and when you would want to use it with caution. Absolutely, I think you're right there, and I think that's the heart of a lot of the strategic thinking around AI tools, I think.
It can be quite hard to get leaders to put out posts, and sometimes we forget that it turns out they actually are humans who are a bit nervous about saying the wrong thing. And I wonder if having this kind of automated coach would give them some reassurance that they are saying a reasonable thing and encourage them to post a little bit more.
Right, let's go on to the next one then. So example number 3, if I can get it to click through. There we go. So AI in analytics. Again, we're going to share the poll again. Exactly the same questions around what your reaction is to what I'm going to show you. So again, this is the first time where we've seen AI being used inside analytics. And for me, I mean, before I talk about the example, for me personally, I think this sort of supportive AI is where AI can bring the most value. There are those ethical questions around generative AI that we've already talked about, and Angela's kind of pointed out in that kind of comment around what, when, how, and why you would use it. Whereas something like this, which is actually trying to help you, I think is really beneficial. So this is from Oak. The way that they present this at the moment is there's a report that's generated each month at the moment, and it reflects on the previous month and then the month before that as well to do some comparable data. They are working on a quarterly and annual version as well, so that then it will look at slightly larger ranges of data, because as everybody knows, you can just have one month that does something and throws off all of your data kind of askew. And what this is doing is presenting your kind of usual charts and tables of information, but then there's a little kind of commentary boxes around the sides that are then highlighting things for you, so you don't have to hunt through data. It is saying this was the particularly successful article last month, and giving you kind of hints and tips on ways to repeat success and maybe avoid failures as well. So this is a few pages of report. It comes as a PDF and PowerPoint, so that then you can weave it into your own documents as you want to, which I quite like, and is their starting point with this. So I think it's, for me, I think this is quite a good start. Sam, what do you think?
I'm glad that they're exploring this, but I'm pretty lukewarm at what I'm seeing at the moment, Susie. Years ago, our colleague Wedge wrote a very good blog article saying don't gather data about things you're not going to act on when it comes to, say, intranet analytics. I was really hoping that the recommendations would be more substantive. I mean, enhanced popular content types is a bit of a generic bit of feedback. If it had said, oh, we've noticed that over the last 3 months, the news articles that really get high engagement are about employee personal stories, do more of those, then it feels more actionable to me.
I must admit, I don't know whether the data that we've got is because it's from like a demo site, or whether whether it would be improved if it was from a real intranet. So someone's asked about Oak. So Oak is a independent intranet solution. So it's one of those intranet products that doesn't need something like SharePoint or Google in the background. It's its own kind of enclosed thing. Yes, James, yes, a word cloud is always a questionable thing to show, because it can be a bit overwhelming. Yeah, they're the more visually attractive pages, shall we say, as to why I chose those two examples. But it's a multi-page report that does have different bits and pieces in it. So
just to build on top of the question about, so Oak has its own content management system, and these analytics are based on the content management system across all the content within the intranet. And the results coming through so far in the poll. So yeah, most people saying it's something that you'd like to use, and I think it's definitely something that we want to see improve. I mean, I've been banging the analytics drum for years now across the industry. It's one of the areas that just could do with it being improved, and with the advent of AI, I think if vendors really
took the time to think about where those areas are that they really could make a difference, I think we could see this being introduced more often, and it would be really helpful. And yeah, quite a few people saying, I wish I'd had this years ago, and I'm the same. I remember having to manually go through a variety of awful tables and things just to try and figure things out that I could then take actionable kind of changes from.
Again, internal comms feels like the poor stepchild of our marketing cousins, doesn't it? Because the marketing tools are already doing way more sophisticated analysis of analytics and coming with recommendations from things like campaign analyses. I don't see why we have to be so far behind, really. So, Susie, we're about to get a whole bunch of demos for the 2025 edition of the report, aren't we? Let's cross our fingers that more vendors are going to start playing in this space.
Absolutely. And I think another one, so I'm going to move on to the next example, which is aiding in search. I think this is another area that we'd like to see more AI kind of featuring, particularly given that public-facing search engines are using and going to be using AI more as well. So again, the poll will open, same list of responses for you to vote on your feelings around this. I've got a few different examples here for you. So the first one is a product called WorkGrid. This is like an overlay that goes on top of something like SharePoint or another intranet solution, and opens up as like a little sliding panel, and allows you to do a variety of activities. So you can see in this one, someone has said, how much vacation do I have left? And then it presents the information from an integrated solution to say how much is left over. And then it also immediately allows you to trigger requesting time off from that result as well. So it's anticipating why you might be asking that question. And then again, another similar kind of question of how do I order a new phone? And then it's allowing you to then look at related content and see the sources kind of behind that data. So they're kind of anticipating and allowing you to kind of travel on to the next stage is available through that. And also interesting point is that WorkGrid and Unily, who I'm sure many of you know, another independent intranet solution, have a partnership now. So Unily and WorkGrid are quite closely working together. So I suspect that Unily will now start to more frequently have a WorkGrid overlay on top of it as well. We also have an example, the little floating one in the top right is from Halo. So this is generating a likely answer from someone's natural language question. So where can I find my timesheet? It then says where you can find it. The thing I find unusual about this is it doesn't then say, and here's the link to it. That would be the natural next stop for me for this one. And then the one behind the scenes is Mango. So Mango Apps, this is their Mango GPT. So them using, you can choose which chat GPT solution you want in the background to apply to whatever it is you're asking. And in this example, the prompt is to summarize an SOP in 3 key bullet points. I would argue those are slightly longer than 3 key bullet points. And I also am not sure that the detail is kind of accurate. So an interesting one there. So 3 quite different things, but all trying to aid that information finding, knowledge management side of things.
Some of that, the Mango one, it's about the quality of the prompt, isn't it? And we see other vendors who put in augmentation for the prompt behind the scenes. And what we're hearing a lot about how to get the most out of things like ChatGPT is actually to start your prompt by describing a scenario, as in you are a HR expert who is giving advice to employees in a large construction company where the employees are not native. You know, that kind of prompt just helps tune in the quality of the results. There's no reason why the vendors couldn't build in extra cues in the prompt to say 3 key points should be a maximum of 200 words. You know, just if people are not getting it right themselves, if end users are struggling, then there's all kinds of assistance and guardrails that you can build in.
And James has asked around how far removed is WorkGrid and possibly Halo from chatbots or bots, which seem like they do something similar. So it's arguable that WorkGrid is a chatbot of sorts. the way that its search works is from that natural language prompt, and then it integrates from a variety of different solutions. So its interface now has moved much more towards that kind of chatbot approach, but it does learn from your data. So whereas with chatbots of old, you'd have to go in and manually teach them, in theory, this should come up with the right answer because it's based off of your data and that kind of ring fencing, which we've already talked about, how accurate that is and whether it's going to respect security and that sort of thing. Whereas with Halo, that is an approach you can take when you're searching for something in an intranet solution. So that little screenshot is just a snippet from a search results page that you would see on any kind of intranet solution or SharePoint, something along those lines. And what I find interesting again about this is you can't teach it. So if someone says, oh, I asked this question and it told me this, but when I went to look at it, it was completely wrong, you can't correct it. Which I think is risky.
When you said about old school chatbots, Susie, you said you had to teach them, but I think actually that's being generous because basically you had to pre-can all the question answer pairs, didn't you?
That's true.
Be the chatbot, really.
Yeah,
a little bit smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, so this will definitely take some of the workload out of that. But I think, yes, I think that those concerns around security is probably going to rest with some of these. I think that's where IT teams and similar will need those really strong strategies and that really good understanding of what does ring fencing actually mean, and could you end up seeing the average salary across your business or see a CEO's salary or something along those lines by accidentally typing in the right or wrong question. Yeah, I think that would be something for us to explore and for you to explore as you're looking. And it certainly seems like something that people would like to use and to see. A couple of people saying they wish they'd had it years ago. The odd person being a little bit nervous and the odd person having questions as well. So I think it's, again, a mixed picture, but a fair reflection of how this works.
I mean, for years, I've been saying that enterprise search should give answers, not links. In the way that Google, when you say how to get from London to Oxford, it'd give you the route, it'd give you the timetable for the train company, it would tell you how to drive there. It didn't say, here's a link, now go and look up to link to the PDF of the railway company's timetables, now you go and figure it out. Whereas a lot of enterprise search on the internet still does that. If you say, how many days leave do I have left? It would say, here's a link to Workday. That's all you're getting, Sam. Now you go and figure it out. Ideally, it would say, Sam, you have 25 days leave entitlement, of which you've got 7 days left, and here's a calendar of the days you booked out. If you want to book some more, fill in this little form, and off you go, rather than making the human do the extra end step. I think we're very close to seeing that in some of these tools. I know Copilot is also doing that for SharePoint behind the scenes, so that's all coming. But I really just want to see that being much more ubiquitous. That if you say, what's my maternity leave entitlement, it actually gives you the answer. But to the people who just fill in the poll saying, I'm nervous, it then needs to also give you a link to the source so you can be absolutely sure before you tell your boss you're going to be off for the next 6 months because the AI bot said you could.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's a reassurance. Let's go on to the last example. So generating words and images, generative AI, exactly the same questions in the poll, going to speed through these examples because we're much more familiar with this stuff. So on the left-hand side, we've got an example from Unily, which is taking a kind of form-based approach to generating content. There are some products that offer generation and also editing, so summarizing things or changing the tone. Then hidden in the background, you can see a little image there is Omnia. So Omnia is using the newest version of Dolly to create images using different prompts. And then the third example is from Interact, which is quite an interesting one, actually within the intranet solution, is doing that kind of language check, and not just around spelling and grammar, but this is actually around diversity and inclusion. So it's highlighting guys instead of using guys, using folks or people, persons, that kind of thing. And if you say fireman, then it will prompt you to change it to firefighter, for example, which I think is again, that supportive check that you don't necessarily, you can just look at it and decide whether it's accurate or not. Whereas perhaps some of those others where they're generating things, you need that really keen kind of editorial eye to catch any errors and take time maybe to amend something.
I'm just chuckling at that last example. I've seen it a few times and I really like it, but you just say, because of you people, we've accomplished incredible things. A lot of suggestions. So yeah, still got to evaluate the prompts, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, don't automatically change them. And this one, as I say, is much more familiar to people. So yeah, there's a more understandable kind of grouping around something that people want to use, see how it'll be useful, but not necessarily for you. Potentially you're, again, small companies or very creative industries as well, perhaps want to keep that control. And some people wishing they'd had it years ago. So I agree with all of that. And someone now saying they have questions, you'll have to post them in the questions because I want to move on to the very last poll. So this is, how ready is your organisation, or maybe the organisations you work most closely with? So the poll for that one will ping up in just a second, all being well. There it is. So we have some good AI tools in place already. We have tools in place, but people aren't using them. Leaders are pushing for AI without a clear strategy. We've been working on our strategy first. We've been talking but not done anything. It's not for us, so we're not doing anything. I think it's fair to say for us at Clearbox, we've been doing a lot of research and thinking about strategy as well, for how we would use it internally, again, as a small team, and being knowledge workers in our own right.
Yes. Perhaps slightly unusually for Clearbox, we actually all like writing things, don't we? We're quite wordy.
Yes.
So these awful robots coming in and taking our jobs, we probably don't feel quite the same need. And I've been using Copilot, and for example, the time it takes to summarize an email, I can scan through it. So I can scan through it in the same time. I'm not finding many things useful, but I do like the way it does automatic transcripts of meetings, and it's really impressive the way it can pick out tasks and actions from what was said. So yeah, we're all finding the use cases that are valuable for us.
Definitely. And some people are saying that they've got some AI tools in place already, so please do share in the chat what you're using, and if you've got any particular challenges that you're facing as well, then please do put them in. It's good to hear that people are using AI tools. From what we see, it is a mixed picture. It does really feel like that kind of a third and a third around how people feel, and how much it's being used is still kind of quite accurate for everything to do with AI, but we see a lot of kind of hesitancy and that need for more education and people to really understand it, because I think the concept is relatively simple, but actually the next step on from that is then more complicated, and for IT teams maybe having to learn all of this stuff brand new whilst also doing their day job and thinking, is it going to be secure and accurate and right for our business, and having to influence strategy. It's not really surprising in some cases it's taking a little while.
Yeah, can we just share the results from the poll, because I don't think the audience can see those. There we go. All right, thank you. 41%. That's actually not far off the McKinsey spread, is it? I think that was like high 30s%. So yeah, good to see.
It's also interesting, no one has said that they're not doing anything, so it seems like it is definitely something that's on the radar for everywhere.
Well, yes, though I don't think this webinar is a randomized sample, to be fair. But
no.
Good to hear. We're nearly out of time, Susie, so we better just do the hard sell and
we better do, yeah. So we'll share the slides afterwards, so I will include this as a bonus slide for you to read through at the end. So this is what you can do about to kind of ask about generative AI, those things to kind of prompt yourself to see whether something that's been generated by AI is usable or not, like this really creepy image that Sam has got from here. A set of questions.
Still gives me nightmares. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is creepy. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. And so we will share the slides at the end of all of this. And I think something for us to kind of think about as a final thought is around that human collaboration, is around how AI can support people rather than it just doing those things that we all love, is actually how these things can support you. And I've just noticed Alexander asking whether the lady in the picture on the slide is part of our team. No, thankfully not, because she would give me nightmares every time we met her, as she was with her creepy hands. But yes, so thank you very much. And yeah, Sam has just said she's an amazing typist. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Hope you've enjoyed our second chat and looking at AI and seeing what's available on the market. We will share these slides with you, so if you want to have a look through, you can do. And we'll share a recording after this session as well, so that you can watch things back and reflect on some of the examples. If you want to have a chat with us about AI or about strategies or anything along those lines to do with digital workplaces and intranets, then please do get in touch. And please do visit our website, clearbox.co.uk/reports, where you can download our latest report, which includes some of the features that we've gone through today around AI that's available in the workplace now. So that's it. Thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you again next time.
Thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed it. Really appreciate you tuning in.